Hello, my name is HannahTodhunter and this is my presentation for Project 1. The following investigation will illustrate the psychological experience of Lake Eden, located in the popular suburban town of North Lakes. The purpose of this exploration is to observe human behavior through the lens of appropriate theories regarding psychological relationships between individuals and their surrounding environments. Throughout my presentation, I will be addressing key topics such as a brief background of environmental psychology, site setting, and the conditions used to conduct my observations, the spatial cognition and perception of the place, personality and identities of influence on emotive responses, and psychosocial behaviors observed within the location. As designers of the environment, it is important that planning professionals and creators understand the impacts of environmental psychology and its traditional attention to how humans interact with their surroundings. Lewin's famous equation articulates that behavior is a function of a person, the environment, and the interaction between the two. Whilst the comprehension of this equation is vital to the understanding of environmental psychology, this presentation introduces other concepts and theories that advance this overall perception. Through the subsequent observational studies, we will be looking in depth at principles encompassing cognitive perception of space, personalities and identities, and psychosocial behavior. Let's first proceed by discussing the timeframes and conditions of which my observations took place in. In order to effectively collect data and information, I conducted my observational site visits over 2 weekdays and 1 weekend in 1-hour intervals. I deemed this schedule the most effective way to conduct my observational studies, as it provided insight into the conditions associated with different timeframes and days of the week, thus allowing me to collect a wider range of material. During each session, a combination of observational methods was used in order to collect both qualitative and quantitative data to support the applicable theory. With reference to Ziesel's framework, several physical traces were identified within the park environment that was suggestive of common behaviors and activities taking place. Byproducts of use, such as erosions, were particularly evident within the space, whilst leftovers and missing traces were very scarce. Erosion was detected through visual signs of wear and tear of patches of grass, which were dead in some places as a result of man-made pathways in commonly travelled through places. Missing tiles on steps were also recognised as a sign of frequent usage. Referring back to Ziesel's framework, adaptations to the space such as props and connections were implemented, consequently creating new opportunities for activities. Seating, playground equipment and shading devices provided the green open space with props that allowed for rest and recreation. Meanwhile, paths, steps and boardwalks provided connection to important places such as the lake and also permitted physical activity. Public messages were also apparent through official and unofficial signs that aim to protect humans and animals and provide information. Spatial cognition refers to the way in which one navigates through an environment with assistance from visual arrangements and components that stimulate wayfinding. Kevin Lynch developed a list of 5 key concepts that contribute to legibility, consisting of paths, edges, districts, nodes, and landmarks. Existing as a shared public area, the varying spaces of North Lakes Town Park are distinguished by visitors through legible spatial layouts that entail certain elements detailed in Lynch's 5 concepts. Paths are a substantial element of the overall space as they provide connection between areas. Conversely, the lake is a component that is not designed for travel, nevertheless is identified as a major feature of the space. The cafe is a notable district within the area as it provides a service and culture through its operation. Nodes take the form of the playground and steps as they are well-known points of access within the space. Meanwhile, the pavilion, which provides seating and shade to its users, is the most prominent landmark of the park. Collectively, these provided elements generate legibility through the way in which they permit easy navigation through the space. In addition to this concept, spatial perception can further enhance cognition through James Gibson's affordance theory, which suggests that an environment could be perceived through substances and surfaces. In the case for North Lakes Town Park, surfaces such as aluminium and timber benches located in both green space and the pavilion are elements that afford seating. Meanwhile, horizontal planes of the ceramic steps or the grassy areas were also perceived as places intended for resting. Moreover, horizontal planes consisting of concrete or timber substances below the feet of visitors are perceived as a surface upon which you travel. Ultimately, the visual cues of the environment determine the means by which people analyze and appraise the site so that they may occupy it appropriately. With some key philosophies surrounding awareness of space in mind, we now turn to the context within which every person operates, the psyche. As defined in Lewin's famous equation, behavior is a result of an individual in a particular setting. A major factor in this model is personality, a notion described by Sam Gosling as an individual, unique pattern of thinking, feeling, and behaving that is consistent over time. The Big Five personality taxonomy, theorized by Louis Goldberg, proposes 5 broad dimensions that make a unique contribution to our understanding of individual behaviors. This inventory comprises of extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness. Conducted observations within the elected site demonstrate a wide range of visiting personalities and their consequent behavioral outcomes. Quantitative studies denoted varying levels of extroversion. Tallies detailed few extroverted people who appeared energetic and talkative through behavioral mannerisms such as loud telephone conversations or openly playing music. Conversely, introverted and quiet individuals tended to listen to music via headphones and not engage in conversation. In terms of agreeableness, there were varying reactions to public official notices that warned not to feed the wildlife. Many ignored the signs and proceeded to feed waterbirds and turtles that inhabit the lake, whereas others were cooperative and obeyed the regulations. During observational sessions, 2 distinct neurotic conditions were detected. Individuals who were relaxed and calm could be sighted laying down or sitting comfortably within the space, whereas anxious or tense persons tended to stand or sit in an upright position, often closely observing surroundings momentarily, feasibly an effect of introversion within a vast and unprotected area. Openness was mainly perceived through the differentiation between adults and children in the area. Children tended to be more creative and imaginative through the way in which they engaged with the playground, a node that affords play. On the other hand, adults tended to supervise and show no signs of creativity within the overall area. Taking into consideration Goldberg's Big Five model, it could be concluded that the space allows a multitude of personalities. However, the average figure within the space was introverted, cooperative, relaxed, and somewhat unimaginative. People manage social space according to accepted rules and individual preferences. Although these rules are not always consciously contemplated, their importance becomes very evident when they are compromised. In certain situations, humans, particularly introverts, require a certain level of privacy. Located in a large open space, the inhabitants of North Lakes Town Park had very few opportunities to isolate themselves from social situations. Psychosocial observations conducted established the ways in which humans acquire privacy under the dimensions of crowding, proxemics, and territoriality. Unlike the quantitative index of population density, crowding is a subjective experience. Whilst the area surrounding the observed space is densely populated, the space itself is open and quite vast, therefore is rarely dense with inhabitants. However, in one occurrence, a lady was observed quietly sitting on the steps next to the lake reading a book. A short while after she'd sat there, a couple with a small child arrived just a few meters away and began to watch the wildlife, whilst loudly chatting and laughing. The original inhabitant of the space was visibly uncomfortable as she frequently glanced at the group, eventually deciding to relocate to a more private space. From this observation, it could be determined that the individual lady had a low capacity to regulate access to others, thus felt crowded, whereas the family were unaffected and did not feel crowded. Correspondingly, proxemics refers to the distance of which an individual will allow others to approach within. In most cases, users of the space held each other at a social distance, particularly on the Monday and Wednesday, which were low-traffic days. However, during the busier observation session, I witnessed a situation where 2 people had occupied the only 2 benches in the space adjacent to the main steps. An individual who seemed to be on a lunch break made his way over from the business precinct and proceeded to sit on the far bench, of which was engaged by an individual who sat on the edge, allowing a perceived space for another occupant. The individual, who was originally sitting on the bench, showed signs of discomfort through fidgeting and foot tapping, before repositioning themselves on the affording seating area of the steps. This surveillance suggests that the initial inhabitant felt as if their personal space had been invaded. Territoriality is a behavioral manner in controlling a defined physical space through means of occupation and personalization. A group of 3 mums and their babies had gathered at the park on the Monday of which my observational session was held during a moderately busy period. I witnessed them personalize the space by laying a picnic rug out and creating a barrier around the perimeter using the 3 available prams and multiple bags, hence marking their territory. This was likely an unconscious measure in protecting themselves and their children from unwanted social interaction with other visitors to the space. As a collective, these behaviors were outcomes of psychosocial mentalities that often indicated a common appeal for privacy. In summary of my conducted observations alongside relevant theories, the North Lakes Town Park has been designed adequately, however there is much room for improvement. With reference to Kevin Lynch's philosophy of legibility, the space could be improved by implementing more paths in order to prevent byproducts of erosion in grassed areas. Conversely, the provision of more private sheltered spaces could potentially better permit relaxation and calmness to introverted individuals who find the current vastness of the space overwhelming. Lastly, the application of more seating spaces, such as benches in the more popular area in front of the main steps, would allow people who require more personal space to feel more comfortable within the site. Based off my spatial and behavioral analyses, it is evident that the space is used for what it has been intended for. However, the argued recommendations would further enhance the space, making it a more efficiently used area within the thriving community of North Lakes.